you. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to speak about two pieces of work that I've been involved in. The first was with parents and families, whether or not they used services, so really about people's experience of family life, where there's a disabled parent in the family. And a second, which was conducted alongside the social care regulator, so was very focused on services and how they're organised and delivered. Just to start with, this issue of, well, who do I mean when I talk about disabled parents? I found, for example, when I phone organisations or I'm trying to seek out contacts with disabled parents, I might get on the phone, and when I use the word disabled parents, people might hear something different. They actually often hear parents of disabled children. And it's almost a failure of the imagination to think about disabled people in their own right, outside of relationships, say, with parents or with carers. And I think it's this sort of, this field focuses in on disabled adults who have caring responsibilities, which may include parenting relationships with their children. So when I talk about disabled parents, I'm talking about it in a way quite similar to how the minister this morning was talking about disability, which is about being inclusive of different impairments and people at different stages of their life course. So I'm talking about people who might have a physical impairment, a sensory impairment, might experience mental distress, parents with a learning difficulty, deaf parents, parents who have a drug or alcohol dependency, and parents who have long-term health difficulties. And I have to say that although I'm trying to be inclusive here, I don't want to pretend that research has been brilliant involving all those different types of experience. Many of those experiences are not understood enough, and the relationships people might have with services that could support their parenting and the rest of their lives, we haven't explored sufficiently. So I'm starting with an inclusive definition. I think the visibility element is an issue that, even though, say, within the UK, people have been talking about disabled parents' experiences for quite a while now, I think there's still an issue in terms of the visibility of the issue. And again, I think there was a theme this morning about when we talk about people's experiences, disabled adults' experiences of day-to-day life and what might support or not support different elements of those lives, we need to look much further than social care and health services and think about housing, education, how schools are run, how they connect with parents, what the local parks are like, the libraries are like, and so on. All of those things are part of all our everyday lives. So it's not just a social care issue, though I apologise, I do tend to veer back towards social care. It's my difficulty that, and I keep trying to pull myself back from it. Within the UK, since the early to mid-1990s, disabled parents have become a little bit more visible. It began, though, with a focus on the children of disabled parents and being thought about in quite limited ways. So although identifying young people who might have inappropriate levels of involvement in care for family members is important, because young people and their family members need support, it actually has limited the way in which we thought about, well, what's it like to be a young person when your parent has an impairment? Similarly, another kind of boundaried visibility of children of disabled parents has been where the focus is on different kinds of risk, and maybe parents with some parents with particular impairments might be more likely to feel that people are looking at them with a risk lens. Is your parenting actually sufficient for your children's welfare and well-being? So although I want to be inclusive, I think different parents experience different difficulties in terms of how their lives are understood. But disabled parents' experiences have become more visible in social policy. Maybe before the 1990s, at least in discussion in the UK, disabled parents hardly ever appeared, their experience hardly ever appeared except where there was considered to be a difficulty. Yeah? So it might be more clinical, more concerned again with this issue of risk. But since then, a little bit more work has been done around what disabled parents' experiences are. And I think that's been very much supported by the value of the social model approach, where we might think about impairment in terms of people's actual experience of a health condition, a physical impairment, pain, those experiences of the body, but we focus on disability as the limitation of opportunities to take part in the normal life of the community on an equal basis with others. I know very little about debate in Ireland, and I think maybe just looking at one newspaper isn't sufficient. So people who wish to speak to me and let me know maybe how disabled parents' issues are talked about and thought about within Ireland, it'd be good to hear from you. But I just have noticed from briefly looking online that the issues for disabled parents seem to come through in a similar way to how they have in England. So, for example, an interest in the situation of young people who may care for a disabled parent, provide support for that parent. The Irish Times in 2009 said that young carers are to be targeted for support. Young carers around the country will be targeted in a move to create a national support network for young people who care for a relative. It was said that whilst there is a strong support network in place for young carers in the UK and Northern Ireland, Linda McKernan of Cork City Partnership said there was no such support for Irish young carers. So this is a couple of years ago. So, I mean, one of the things that might be useful for me to know about is whether young carers have been taken forward as a specific issue. And recently, in June this year, the Times reported concern that the state is removing children from parents who have mild intellectual disabilities with little or no effort being made to support these people as parents. And I think that theme's already come through this afternoon, and that was from Inclusion Ireland. So, as I say, my understanding of the debate in Ireland is limited, but I'd be interested to talk to you. So I just want to make a few points from a couple of projects I've been engaged in. And the first one was the project where parents that we spoke to, the 70 parents and their families that we spoke to, might have been accessing social care, might not have been accessing social care, but they had a physical or sensory impairment, or they experienced mental distress. We would always speak to the disabled parent. If there was a partner and the partner was willing to be involved and the parent was willing for that partner to be involved, they were spoken to, and a child aged between 7 and 18. And I did the work with Richard Olson. We were both then at the University of Leicester. The context in which this work was done, even though it wasn't service-focused, was where there was increased concern about the ways in which services were responding to disabled parents and their families. And this concern was very much about whether adult services and children's services worked closely together when needed, or whether adult services responded to disabled adults in their own right to support them in all of their lives, including their parenting. So a report was written by the Inspectorate of Social Services in 2000, and they said that the social model of disability is not transferring into actions on the ground, while staff appeared to either focus on children in the family or on the impact of adults' disability on their personal needs. Workers seldom focused on the whole family, and I think some of those tensions about whether we need to think family or whether there are difficulties in that are still with us. Workers seldom focused on the whole family and how to support and help the parents in the discharge of their parental duties in their social setting. So that was the context then. And in talking to parents, whether or not they were using services, many spoke about different ways in which people responded to and heard what they were saying. And people could feel that either a risk lens was being used, quite a functional lens, or a barriers lens. When I talk about a risk lens, I mean that people were thinking very much of that a child of a disabled parent might be more likely to be a child in need. When I talk about a functional lens, I mean that this is where the focus is really quite narrowly on some personal care needs in terms of functioning in daily living. And when I talk a barriers lens, I mean taking a more equal opportunities understanding. So what are the supports that all parents need, and what might make it more difficult for some disabled parents to have those equal opportunities. I think the risk lens is something all of us can feel if we have if we are parents, or if we feel that we take responsibility for offering support for others. Disabled parents sometimes told us they were creating risk. So, for example, a mother with mental distress said the consultant said to her, the mental health consultant, I turned up with my bump, so I'm heavily pregnant, and he says, you do realise you'll be ill soon. And she felt this was being done without any support or without any discussion, and actually was an unwelcome comment. Another disabled parent was told that her disabled child was emulating her. This was not positive, this was a negative connotation. Your disabled child is not developing in the way in which we would hope because she is emulating you as a disabled mother. I'm going to cut through some of these because I know I haven't got that much time left, but what I will say is I think there are some implications of this risk lens. I think it can make it more difficult for people to seek out services, ask for services, because they may think that people are going to be more concerned with focusing on supposed risks to children than they are with actually seeing the disabled parent as a carer and in control of their own parenting activity. Very briefly, a functional lens could be where people just experience very narrow responses to their needs. So, for example, a need to have a bed. So you speak to parents who have a bed downstairs and have no personal space. Children are there. Or you speak to parents where they can't get to their children's bedroom. That's a very functional response that isn't actually thinking about how parents want to and need to relate to their children on a daily basis. So a barriers lens is actually about people having access to appropriate supports, including information, as we spoke about this morning. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to dart through some of these. I think if we take an equal opportunities approach, what makes family life and parenting possible is the same as what makes parenting possible for others, which is an adequate income, appropriate housing, access to informal networks and the wider local community, access to schools and access to further support when needed. So this is very much actually saying what is shared by all parents and what has made it more difficult for some disabled parents to access those resources that are part of all of our lives. I'll just flag up that there are some really useful publications out there, including by Jenny Morris and Michelle Waits. I've got 2 slides on that. So they've written a review of current research and practice evidence and a guide for local authorities and services developing policy and practice. And a follow-up study to that was conducted by the Commission for Social Care Inspection, and I worked with them very much to speak to people developing services and seeking to join up work between adults and children's services. This study also included workshops with parents, family members, practitioners and people involved in policy development within councils within England. I just have to see what I can skip. These slides will be up there, so if you want more information, you want to access the full report, you should be able to find that, and do email me if you want to talk to me about it. So we did involve 50 councils. We wanted to know whether councils were making sure not only that social care was being thought about, but that other services were being considered, and if they were thinking about how services work together. Just to let you know, parents expressed issues that I think were around in the 90s when people were doing research initially. We face problems because there's a perceived contradiction between being a parent and being disabled, as if you can't be both. And for people using services, I'm disabled, I'm a parent, but neither the twain shall meet. The 2 services argue, and I'm left in the middle. So this is where children's services and adult services really aren't thinking about that person as a parent and their whole family. Managers of services actually recognised that children's services and adult services often saw things in very different ways. Councils often weren't collecting much information about who parents were and disabled parents were in their communities, and most councils agreed that in their policies they tended to just think about adult services or children's issues and didn't bring them together very often. Having a holistic approach was seen as very important, and there are some important service developments out there which you will see if you do access the PowerPoint through the Sky website, and also can access information through this report. So often services are finding ways of actually building agreements about how shall we respond to a disabled parent who's seeking support, what's the most appropriate service that can be offered to support that disabled adult in their own right. And apologies again for the rush through those slides, but I think the main issues that I would pull together are, I think there's a continuing issue about the visibility of disabled parents, and thinking about disabled parents actually as being an experience of many families rather than quite narrow, which has been the situation when we've had the risk lens used too often. And it's important to identify and challenge disabling practice, including disabling attitudes, which again has been a theme here. How do we experience practitioners when we speak to them about our experience or our family members' experience of disability? What restricts us talking about either parenting or becoming a parent? and just the importance of continuing to use and develop the information base in relation to policy and practice, local services and local, in England, the council's actually having an understanding of local population and disabled parents within their localities, and thinking about, well, what research has been done and what questions aren't we asking, and what do disabled parents think is important that we're not actually bringing forward to services and to policymakers. There's some links there if you do access the PowerPoint, and do contact me and I'd be happy to receive any questions.